In the middle of a traffic jam, Emile and his father François are having an argument because Emile didn't want to come and they were late because of him. Ultimately, Emile gets tired of his father's scolding and leaves the auto, so François goes after him. At that moment, they notice an ambulance shaking while Commodity screams outside before the windows break. François incontinently drags Emile into caching as the ambulance's doors are pushed open and a critter half raspberry half man comes out, landing on top of auto. Security officers rush to regain the mutant, who struggles and yells at them, spooking everyone on the road. The mutant manages to throw the officers down from him and also runs down. Eventually, laterally, Emile and François arrive at the sanitarium to see the croaker who's treating Emile's mama Lana, who's also shifting into a beast. It turns out that for the last 2 times, numerous people each over the country have suddenly started shifting into more brutish forms, and most of the time they end up being veritably violent. Authorities are trying their stylish to catch them all and keep them in technical institutions, where the mutants are kept calm with anodynes while they re-studied, hoping to find a cure. Most people are spooked of the mutants and want them to be locked up. Emile doesn't want to see his mama because he's come cautious of her since she accidentally scratched his face, but François insists she's still family. The croaker explains a new and more advanced event center has opened in the south and Lana should be transferred there, which François snappily accepts. He wants to move there with Emile so they can start a new life, down from the judgment of people who formerly knew Lana. When they enter Lana's room, Emile notices all the scrapes on the walls and doesn't go too close. François does sit with her and talks to her, believing it helps, but Emile doesn't suppose she can understand anything they say. Some weeks laterally, Emile, François, and their canine move to their new home by the timber. Soon Emile starts going to academy, and when the schoolteacher introduces him to the class, Nina asks too numerous questions. Emile decides to lie and says his mama is dead before explaining his scar was caused by lightning. Laterally that night, a huge storm strikes the city. The power goes out, and Emile is woken up by the noise caused by the wind and the lightning. He goes to check the window and is startled by a critter looking into the house, but as soon as François brings back the power, the critter is gone. The coming day, they admit an exigency call and rush to the original lake, where the police and the firemen have closed up the area. It turns out the storm has caused an ambulance to get off the road and crash into the lake, and when they see a bobby reacquiring the body of a critter, François fears the worst. This was the ambulance that was transporting all the mutants to the new center, and now half of them are dead while others have escaped. The bobbies hold down a hopeless François as he yells for his woman, but Officer Julia assures him they haven't set up Lana's body, so she must be nearly in the timber. Once they return home, François starts hanging some of their clothes on the trees around the house, hoping the smell will companion Lana to them. The coming day during class, the spa schoolteacher sends the class to play Hall of War, and Emile's whole platoon incontinently falls to the ground except for him. Unexpectedly, he's able of pulling alone long enough for his teammates to return him and win the match. Subsequently, everyone is impressed by Emile's strength and invites him to a party. Still, Emile is too busy examining his fritters and rushes back to his house, where he uses some tweezers to pull Commodity from under his nails as he screams in pain. He's shocked to discover some small claws, meaning he's sluggishly starting to change as well. Also, he checks his reverse in the glass and notices the shape of his column is changing too. Furious, he throws effects around the restroom before getting in the hogshead to wash down the shame. His canine gets in the hogshead with him to console him. Meanwhile, François goes to the correspondence and bumps into Julia, who informs him they are in searching presently because the government promised to shoot the service. Suddenly, they hear some screaming because the guests saw a mutant. Julia orders her teammates to avoid the boardwalk, but François quests for the mutant to check if it's Lana. The critter turns out to be a squid mutant that only wants some fish to eat, and when she notices she's been set up, she throws a box of shrimp at them before running down. She continues to throw arbitrary food at Julia as she chases after her, but this isn't enough to stop a trained officer, so Julia jumps on her to capture her. François looks under some grocery display and finds another mutant looking terribly spooked, but he decides not to tell the bobbies. The following Friday, Emile goes to the party and has lots of fun. His classmates respect the brands brought by a Joe who'll be making a donation at the forthcoming Midsummer Jubilee. Suddenly, the alcohol starts making Emile feel sick and he falls off his seat. Nina hands him some drug and Emile can't stop his body from licking her hand to pick it up, causing the others to freak out. Ashamed and embarrassed, Emile escapes through the timber, hearing the noises made by other mutants. The coming morning, Emil wakes up near the lake when he hears the noise made by a speedboat passing in. He finds blood in his mouth and incontinently spits before leaving, seeing anti-mutant graffiti on his way home. At his house, he rushes to the restroom and throws up a feather, which makes him realize he ate a raspberry last night. Subsequently, François and Emil ignore the walls left by the bobbies and go to the timber to search for Lana. Emil asks his pater how he felt when Lana started to change, and François explains he was no way spooked. She was still his woman, just a little different. When night falls, they continue the hunt on the auto, screaming through the windows while playing Lana's favorite song at full volume. They end up spending the night in the auto, and in the morning, Emil notices his nails are changing again. Suddenly his canine runs down and Emil follows him, only to discover a trimmer child on a tree. At that moment, the raspberry man from the morning tackles Emil to the ground and starts hitting him with his bodies while his claws hurt his shoulder, making it bleed. Still, the man freezes when he looks into Emil's eyes and realizes he's a mutant. 2. Emil's screaming makes François run to his son, grabbing him by the arm while asking the raspberry man to stay down. Once they back in the auto, François announces they going to the sanitarium, but Emil refuses because they discover the verity. Their argument causes them to nearly crash against a steed, but François stops the auto just in time and they notice they arrived at the riding academy. The bobbies are around and Julia explains a mutant attacked the nags, so François uses the chance to ask for a favor. An army nanny ends up giving Emil the aches he needs and believes the story that the canine smelled his shoulder. Latterly at home, Emil removes some of the stitching and starts licking the sopping crack. Eventually, during lab class, Emil notices that Nina has a choker with a feather like the bone he gagged and freaks out, but Nina incontinently calls him out on it. Also, he can't concentrate because he's distracted by the ferrets grassing in their pen. Ultimately, he snaps and yells at them, telling them to shut up. After class, Emil has trouble riding his bike because of his body changes and Nina tries her stylish to stay probative, indeed inviting Emil to hang out at her house. While preparing a snack, Emil opens the fridge and finds a dead raspberry, so Nina explains she set up it at her door after the party and took its feather for the choker. Emil realizes he didn't eat it, he left it for her as a gift. Nina is keeping it because she contributed as food for the mutants. Subsequently, Emil gets in the lake and catches a fish with his own hands, which is seen by a neighbor. Also, he looks for the raspberry man, who's trying to fly and keeps falling on the ground over and over. Emil leaves the fish for him and learns that he's called himself Fix because he couldn't flash back his real name. Seeing Fix's injuries from his failed breakouts, Emil points out there's a safer spot to practice and takes Fix to the lake. After Emil removes all the branches from the water to avoid further injuries, Fix agrees to exercise there. In the evening, Emil tries to ride his bike home but he keeps falling, so he decides to leave it in the timber and tell his pater that it was stolen. Meanwhile, at the bar François is working at, he discovers the proprietor has many anti-mutant t-shirts, which makes him veritably uncomfortable. Also, he takes out the trash and hears some noises in the vicinity when he suddenly gets seized by a mutant, who pushes François to the ground. Noticing the critter is in chains, François tries to calm it down peacefully, only to see an alternate mutant running down. At that moment, a colleague pushes the critter back with an oarsman, revealing the mutant is a relative of hers and she's been hiding it at work. She and François try to guide the critter back into caching, but the mutant freaks out and rushes to the front of the bar, causing everyone to run. In fear, believing the other critter could been Lana, François runs to the timber and finds his woman in full bear form, who makes a noise at him before leaving. Latterly, during lunch at Academy, Emil feels commodity in his mouth and suddenly spits out a tooth. The others are grossed out, so he pretends it was a baby tooth. In the autumn, he visits Fix, who keeps falling into the water over and over while trying to learn to fly. When Fix takes a break, Emil looks at his injuries and removes the girth on his face, discovering that the croakers had done a horrible surgery job to remove the growing beak. In the evening, Julia goes with François to the timber to help him hunt for Lana, and they have to hide every time they see a police auto pass by. In the end, they don't find any critter, but François is shocked to find Emil's bike. When he returns home, François discovers the restroom Gamora is congested, so he removes the pipe to empty it. Inside, he finds many of hair and some claws, which eventually makes him realize Emil's also changing. Once Emil comes home too, François shows him the claws in the bike, but Emil denies everything. François has locked up the house and refuses to let him in until he confesses, so Emil tries to run down. A hopeless François runs after him and tackles him to the ground, complimenting Emil tightly as he has a breakdown. The coming morning, Emil eats directly from his plate rather than using a chopstick, but François stays probative. He also shares some of Lana's drugs so Emile can control his impulses while he's in class. Also, François checks Emile's mouth and confirms the fangs are at the back for now, so others won't see them. He reminds his son to cut his nails every day and put some cotton in his cognizance before covering them with hair. That way his enhanced hail won't be overwhelmed by noises. Incipiently, François shows Emile how to use a hair-junking cream on his body. Latterly that day, Emile exchanges with Nina on the phone while taking a walk outside the house. He asks Nina to scream, and when she does, he's happy to discover he can hear her all the way from there. The coming day, Emile visits Fix and discovers he can't talk presently. He can only make raspberry sounds. After Emile hugs him, Fix climbs up a tree and also jumps, revealing he's eventually suitable to fly and greatly enjoys doing it. Subsequently, Emile goes to the Jubilee, where his father is working. François is furious to see him because Emile should be hiding, and an argument ensues that snappily escalates into physical aggression. Emile growls as he bites his pater on the shoulder, not letting go until François threatens him with scissors. Upset and confused, Emile walks down and bumps into Nina, who invites him to take a walk through the cornfields. The teens end up kissing and affects snappily toast up, so they lie down to get dirty. When Emile removes his shirt, Nina discovers the hair in the changed chine, but she says she knew it and keeps going anyway. Also, they return to the Jubilee and Emile goes to the restroom, where he's cornered by a classmate who saw him and Nina on the field. The Joe makes a noise with a little machine that only creatures are supposed to hear, which incontinently hurts Emile's cognizance. Spooked, Emile attacks the boy, leaving scrape marks on his face. Emile incontinently runs to hide in the field while the boy cautions all the locals, causing them to snare their munitions and call the police. Soon a canine finds him, but Emile scares him down with a dinghy. Seeing the canine run, two men open fire in the direction and Emile crosses the lake to stop them, but the frustrated men open fire from across the water and sorely hit Fix. Emile incontinently rushes to his friend's side and cries as Fix dies in his arms. Twinkles laterally. François and the Nimrods find Fix's body but no Emile in sight. Meanwhile in city, a large mutant is sneaking around while the army exchanges make their way to the timber. The coming day, Emile stays hidden in the timber eating any fruit he can find. In the evening, he climbs a tree and joins the chorus of nightly brutes with his own howling. The ensuing night, a storm hits the area so Emile hides inside a delve. He gets spooked when he's approached by a bear, only to realize this is his mama. They impinge their facades together to admit their love for each other. Also, Lana leaves, wanting her son to follow her. Emile does so and discovers tons of mutants living together in harmony, including the trimmer girl. At that moment he sees flares shot through the sky, meaning the army has set up them. Emile and the other mutants try to run and hide, but the dog faces are using the painful sound so the brutes can't do anything other than drop on the ground in pain and be captured. The only bone that escapes is the trimmer girl, who uses disguise to hide. Latterly at the police station, François helps Emile declare he'd been drunk and ended up in the timber by mistake. Still, when Emile has to subscribe the release papers, his hands can't snare the pen and breaks the distance. When the Bobby gives him a new one, Emile can't help growling at him, so François incontinently pushes the Bobby to knock him down before he could raise the alarm. The officer hits his head and passes out while François seals the document himself. Also, he snappily shows it to the receptionist and successfully leaves with Emile. Subsequently, they get in the auto to leave city. Soon the police start chasing them, but François promises Emile he won't go to any institution and drives his Presto.